sound you just heard was a woman hitting the water. Not the ocean, not a river, a pool. A beautiful, perfectly lit pool at a 15-year anniversary party, surrounded by 100 guests in formal wear, holding champagne, watching her go over the edge. And the man who was supposed to love her, her husband, the father of her children, the man whose name she had been carrying for 15 years, he laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not the laugh of a man horrified by what just happened in front of his friends and colleagues and family. A real laugh. A comfortable laugh. The laugh of a man who found something genuinely amusing. He raised his glass. He said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "Relax, everyone. She's always dramatic." And in that moment, with her white dress soaked through, mascara running down her face, water in her lungs, Claire Montgomery made a decision. Not out of rage, not out of grief, but out of something far more dangerous: clarity. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm going to tell you exactly what happened before that night, during that night, and everything that came after it. Because this story, on the surface, looks like a story about a man who betrayed his wife. But it's not. This is a story about what a woman does when she finally stops being afraid of the one thing she's been avoiding her entire marriage. The truth. 3 questions are going to drive everything you're about to hear. First, did Ryan know what was going to happen at that party? Second, what did Claire know that nobody else in that room did? And third, when she was done, who was left standing? Stay with me, because the answers are not what you think. Claire grew up in a small house in a mid-sized city, with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who left before she started school. She doesn't talk about leaving much. What she talks about, what defined her, was watching her mother get up every single morning and go. No complaints, no excuses, just work and love and dinner on the table and a kiss on the forehead every night before bed. Her mother told her 2 things over and over, from the time she was old enough to understand words. Your worth is not up for debate. And never let anyone make you small. Claire carried those words like armor. She was a good student, not because school came easily, but because she refused to let it beat her. She was a loyal friend. She was the kind of woman who showed up, who remembered, who paid attention. When she was 26, she met Ryan Montgomery at a work event she almost didn't attend. He walked in late, apologized to no one, and somehow managed to make the entire room feel like he had done them a favor by arriving. Claire noticed him the way you notice the weather. Something in the atmosphere shifts. You can't quite name it yet, but you know something's coming. He asked for her number. She gave it to him. He called 3 days later. Not the next day, not 2 days later, 3. And she thought, this is a man who knows what he's doing. She was right. She just didn't yet understand what, exactly, he was doing. They dated for 2 years. In that time, Ryan was everything a woman could want in a partner. Attentive, generous, ambitious, without being cold. He brought her flowers for no reason, and he remembered the names of her friends. He met her mother and was genuinely charming. Claire's mother liked him. That mattered to Claire more than she admitted out loud. They married in the fall, in a ceremony that was beautiful without being excessive. Claire wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. Ryan cried at the altar. Real tears, or what looked, at the time, like real tears. The first few years were good. Maybe not perfect. No marriage is. But genuinely, substantively good. And they bought a house. They argued about small things and repaired them. They had 2 children, a boy and then a girl, and Ryan was, by every outward measure, a present and loving father. Claire paused her career. This was a mutual decision, or at least that's how it was framed. Ryan's company was growing. Someone needed to manage the home, the children, the domestic logistics. Claire was organized. Claire was capable. Claire, Ryan said, was the backbone of everything they had built. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? The cracks, when they came, were small. So small that for a long time Claire talked herself out of seeing them. A phone left face down, when before he'd always left it face up. A dinner reservation confirmed to a restaurant she knew he didn't like, on a night she knew he said he was working late. A cologne she didn't recognize on a shirt he insisted had been to a client meeting. She asked him once, and she sat him down at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night when the children were in bed, and she looked at him directly, and she said, "Ryan, is there someone else?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get defensive. He looked at her, calmly, steadily, and he said, "Claire, you need to talk to someone. This jealousy is becoming a problem." She apologized. She apologized to him for asking a reasonable question. And she went to bed that night, telling herself she was paranoid, she was insecure, and she was being unfair to a man who had never given her reason to doubt him. What she did not know, could not have known at that moment, was that she was being managed. Carefully, expertly, deliberately managed by a man who had spent years learning exactly which words would make her go quiet. Sasha Vane entered their lives through a business deal 18 months before the anniversary party. Ryan introduced her to Claire at a company event as a financial consultant. Sharp, professional, well-dressed. Claire shook her hand and felt nothing except a faint, distant unease she immediately dismissed. Over the following months, Sasha's name appeared more and more in Ryan's conversations. A meeting with Sasha. A call with Sasha. Sasha had suggested a new approach to the quarterly projections. Sasha was brilliant, Ryan said. Claire hosted her for dinner. She sat across from this woman and made her feel welcome, filled her wine glass, laughed at her jokes. Later, Claire would say that was the hardest part to sit with. Not the betrayal, the hospitality, the way she had opened her own home, her table, her candles, the good dishes, to a woman who was already sleeping with her husband. 8 months before the anniversary party, Claire found an invoice. She managed the books for Ryan's company, had done so for years, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. It was one of those invisible contributions that everyone depends on and nobody names. A hotel bill. A single night. 2 names. A date that matched a night Ryan had told her he was at a conference in another city. She sat with that invoice for a very long time. And then, and this is where Claire's story becomes something more than a betrayal story, she did not confront him. She did not cry to her friends. She did not post about it online. She did not shake him awake in the middle of the night and demand answers. She made a folder. So she titled it Documents, the most unremarkable name she could think of, and she began to fill it. Phone records, legally obtained, financial statements, a property search in Ryan's name that turned up 2 assets she had never been told about. She requested documents she was legally entitled to as a co-owner of their shared holdings. She made calls she kept short and professional. She did all of this while making school lunches, while attending parent-teacher conferences, and while sitting next to Ryan at Sunday dinners and asking him about his week. For 8 months. She did this quietly, for 8 months. The anniversary party was Ryan's idea. 100 guests, a catered estate, a string quartet for the cocktail hour. He presented it to Claire over breakfast one morning as a celebration of everything they had built. Claire said yes. Of course she said yes. Because Claire, with her folder, with her knowledge, with her 8 months of careful or invisible documentation, was not ready to move yet. She was waiting for the right moment, with the right foundation, with every piece exactly in place. She told her sister 2 weeks before the party that something felt wrong. "Like I'm being set up," she said. Her sister told her she was overthinking. She told Claire that Ryan was throwing her a party. That was romantic, not sinister. Claire let the subject drop. She had already made her own calculations. The night of the party, and she wore white. Not by accident. Claire never did anything by accident. She stood in front of her mirror and looked at herself for a long moment. This woman she had built over 40-plus years. This woman who had loved and worked and given and been quietly reduced. And she straightened her posture. And she walked out. The estate looked like something from a magazine. Candles lining every surface. Jazz from the garden. 100 people who loved Ryan, or needed him, dressed in their finest, circulating through the warm summer air. Claire moved through the crowd the way she always did, graciously, warmly, touching shoulders, refilling glasses, making everyone feel seen. This was her domain. She had built it. Every person there had at some point eaten at her table, received a handwritten note from her, been the subject of her genuine and specific attention. Ryan moved through the same party differently, working the room, receiving congratulations, laughing loudly. See, he and Claire crossed paths twice in the first hour. Both times he looked past her almost immediately. She saw Sasha by the pool. Red dress, standing close to Ryan, closer than a consultant, closer than a colleague, close in the particular way that only happens when two people have stopped pretending to themselves that boundaries exist. Ryan's hand, briefly, at the small of her back. Claire watched this from across the garden. She took one slow breath. She set down her champagne glass, and she walked toward them. What was said in those next few moments has been described differently by almost everyone who claims to have witnessed it. Some say Claire raised her voice. Others say she never raised it at all, that she was perfectly controlled. Some say Sasha looked afraid. Others say she looked triumphant. What is not disputed, what every person who was there that night agrees on, is what happened next. Sasha's hand connected with Claire's shoulder. Oh, and Claire, in her white anniversary dress, on the 15th anniversary of her marriage, went into the pool. The crowd went silent. And then Ryan laughed. He raised his glass. He said, loud enough for a dozen people to hear, "Relax, everyone. She's always dramatic." Nobody moved to help her out of the water. Not immediately. Some people looked at the ground. Some looked at Ryan, taking their cue from him. Sasha looked at her manicure and said, "Oops, accident." Claire surfaced. Mascara running. Dress soaked through. Water in her ears, in her lungs, in her hair. The string quartet had stopped playing, and she looked up at the edge of the pool, at the ring of people standing above her, and she found Ryan's face. And she said, quietly enough that only he and Sasha could hear, "You just signed your own ruin." Ryan snapped, "Stop embarrassing me." And then he turned back to his guests and began moving the party along, and nobody helped Claire out of the water, and then she pulled herself out alone, and she walked with her head up through 100 people who parted to let her pass. She went to the guest bathroom. She locked the door. She sat on the edge of the tub for perhaps 60 seconds, just 60 seconds, and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened to her. Then she took out her phone, and she started making calls. The first call was to her college roommate, so a woman named Diana, who Ryan had always found slightly irritating and therefore never bothered to learn anything about. Diana, who happened to be one of the most respected divorce attorneys in the state. Diana, who picked up on the second ring and said, "I've been waiting for this call." Because Diana knew. Claire had told her, in pieces, carefully, over the past several months, enough that Diana had already begun reviewing Claire's situation informally, without filing anything, and without leaving any footprint. Just a friend who happened to know the law inside out, helping another friend understand what her options might look like. The second call was to an accountant. Not their shared accountant, her own, one she had quietly retained 4 months earlier. She gave him one instruction: begin the process we discussed. Tonight. She was in that bathroom for 45 minutes. When she came out, her hair was pinned back, and her dress was still damp. And she rejoined the party and spent the next 2 hours being gracious and warm and present. Nobody asked if she was okay. Ryan gave a toast about their marriage that received a standing ovation. The morning after the party, Ryan came downstairs and made coffee, and acted as though nothing had happened. He asked Claire if she had calmed down. He told her she needed to be less sensitive if she wanted to maintain their social standing. When he said Sasha felt terrible about the accident, he used the word accident, and that an apology would be forthcoming. Claire listened. She nodded. She said very little. What she did not tell Ryan, what she would not tell him for several more weeks, was that while he slept the night before, she had been on her laptop, that she had been awake until 4 in the morning finalizing documents, that the process her accountant had initiated the night before had already begun to move. And there is a particular kind of power in being underestimated, in being seen as dramatic, as sensitive, as someone who needs to calm down. Ryan had handed Claire that power over and over for years. He had trained himself to see her as manageable, as someone whose reactions were performance rather than signal. It was the most expensive mistake of his life. In the weeks that followed the party, Claire did something that people who heard about it later found almost impossible to understand. She became, by outward appearance, calmer, more settled, more present. She attended their sons' football games. She hosted a Sunday brunch for the neighbors. She was seen at the farmers' market on Saturday mornings, unhurried, pleasant, buying flowers for the kitchen table. Ryan interpreted this as a resolution, as Claire accepts reality, moving past her feelings, getting back to normal. He felt relieved. He began making plans. He told a close friend that he was going to file for divorce, and that he had found something real with Sasha, that Claire would be taken care of. He would be generous, he said. But it was time to start the next chapter. He had already, in his mind, decided what Claire deserved. He had a number. He had a timeline. He had a story to tell about the marriage, that they had grown apart, that they wanted different things, that it was amicable, and he had practiced it until it felt true. What he did not know was that Claire had also been building a story, and except hers was not a narrative. It was evidence. Her attorney Diana later described the documentation Claire brought to their first formal meeting as the most organized financial case she had reviewed in 20 years of family law. Two offshore accounts Ryan had established 18 months earlier, just around the time Sasha appeared. Funds transferred from their jointly owned business holdings into accounts in Ryan's name alone. And three real estate transactions conducted without Claire's knowledge, despite the fact that as co-owner, she was legally required to be notified. And then, the thing that even Diana had not expected, a life insurance policy change. Ryan had quietly altered the beneficiary of a policy without Claire's knowledge. The new beneficiary was not a family member. You understand what that means. Claire understood what that meant. And this was not a man who had fallen in love with someone else and was struggling with how to leave his marriage. This was a man who was engineering a departure, deliberately, methodically, financially, and who had planned for Claire to end up with as little as possible. She had been living with that knowledge for 6 weeks before the party. 6 weeks of Sunday dinners, 6 weeks of school runs, 6 weeks of sitting across from him and passing the salt. Sasha's involvement, when it was fully uncovered, shocked even Claire. She was not simply Ryan's affair partner. Her name appeared on 2 of the financial transfers as a listed consultant, meaning she had, with full knowledge, participated in the movement of assets that belonged, in part, to Claire. She had signed documents. She had received fees. She had sat at Claire's dinner table, eaten Claire's food, smiled across the candles at a woman whose financial security she was helping to dismantle. And Claire's attorney said later that when Claire heard this confirmed, when the paper trail made it irrefutable, Claire went very quiet. Not angry, not tearful, just quiet, in the particular way of someone absorbing something they already suspected but had hoped was wrong. She said one thing. She said, "Okay, then we add her to the civil filing." And she moved on to the next document. Ryan scheduled the conversation for a Saturday morning. He had prepared what he wanted to say, and he had practiced it. He was going to be direct, but kind. That was the version he had told himself. He was going to offer Claire a generous settlement and frame the divorce as a mutual recognition that they had grown apart. He came downstairs to find Claire at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a very calm expression. He sat down. He began the sentence he had rehearsed. His phone rang before he could finish it. His business partner, confused, asking about a filing. Ryan told him he'd call back. His phone rang again. His bank. Then his attorney. Each calls the same confused, increasingly urgent tone. "Did you authorize this?" Ryan looked up from his phone at Claire. She was still drinking her coffee. Her expression had not changed. He said, "What have you done?" She said, "I've done exactly what you taught me, Ryan. I protected my assets." The divorce filing that Ryan's attorney received the following Monday was, in legal terms, comprehensive in a way that Ryan's team was not prepared for. It was named the offshore accounts. It detailed the real estate transactions. It included copies of the financial transfers with Sasha's signatures visible. It challenged the life insurance beneficiary modification on the grounds that it had been conducted without proper marital notification. It also included a separate civil filing against Sasha Vane for her role in the financial misconduct. Ryan retained a team. He had money, connections, and the confidence of a man who had never genuinely lost at anything. His strategy was to discredit Claire, to paint her as emotionally volatile, obsessive, a woman whose jealousy had curdled into vindictiveness. He produced witnesses who described her as erratic. He submitted records of therapy appointments, framed as evidence of instability rather than strength. Sasha filed a statement claiming the pool incident had been an accident caused by a misunderstanding, that Claire had lunged toward her, that Sasha had only tried to create distance. It was a coherent strategy. It might even have worked, except for the camera. Ryan had installed a security system on the estate 3 years earlier. Cameras at the entrance, at the garage, covering the back garden. He had forgotten, or simply never considered, that one of those cameras faced the pool deck directly. The footage was retrieved by Claire's team through standard discovery proceedings. Ryan's attorney, when informed of its existence, requested a 48-hour delay. The request was denied. The footage was reviewed in a closed session with both legal teams present. It showed what the witnesses had not. Sasha had not lost her balance. There was no stumble, no accident, no moment of accidental contact. She had turned toward Claire with full intention, made deliberate contact with both hands, and pushed. Clear. Unambiguous. Caught on a camera that Ryan had purchased and installed himself. The case changed that afternoon. Ryan's narrative, the unstable wife, the vindictive woman, the dramatic overreaction, did not survive the footage. The witnesses who had described Claire as erratic quietly revised their accounts. The story that had been carefully constructed over months began, rapidly, to come apart. His attorney advised settlement. Ryan, for the first time in this entire story, did not get to decide the terms. The negotiation took 4 months. It was not smooth. Ryan fought. He contested figures, challenged valuations, delayed filings. He was not a man who yielded gracefully. But the financial documentation was airtight. The footage was undeniable. And Sasha, facing her own civil exposure, settled separately and quickly, in a way that did not help Ryan's remaining arguments. The final settlement gave Claire the family home. Joint custody, with a schedule Claire had designed to protect the children's stability. A financial outcome that her attorney described, privately, as a complete reversal of what Ryan had planned for her. The offshore accounts were included in the marital estate. The hidden properties were valued and divided. The life insurance beneficiary was restored. Ryan signed the documents on a Tuesday morning. Claire was not in the room. She was at her new office. And this is the part of the story that people who know Claire say they should have predicted but didn't. Nobody expected, after everything, that her first move would be to work. She had a career before Ryan. Strategy consulting, organizational development, the kind of quiet, infrastructure-level work that makes companies function. She had paused it for 15 years. She had been told, in ways explicit and subtle, that her real contribution was the life they had built together. The home, and the children. The social architecture that made Ryan's professional life run smoothly. She took the settlement, and she invested a portion of it into a small firm. Her name on the door. Her own clients. Her own calendar. The first 2 clients she signed were former colleagues of Ryan's, people who had been at the party that night, people who had watched what happened by the pool and drawn their own conclusions about who, exactly, they wanted to do business with. Within 18 months, so the firm had grown enough to require a second hire, then a third. Claire described the work, in an interview she gave to a small professional journal 2 years later, as the most alive she had felt since her 20s. Ryan's company restructured within a year of the settlement. The financial exposure from the divorce proceedings, the accounts that had to be disclosed, the transactions that had to be explained, created instability that his board ultimately decided they could not overlook. And he stepped down. Not fired. He retained enough equity that the parting was carefully managed, professionally worded. But he stepped down. He and Sasha lasted another 8 months after the settlement. Those who know her say she doesn't discuss Ryan Montgomery. She relocated. She keeps a low profile in the way that people do when they would prefer a particular chapter of their lives not to be findable. Ryan, by most accounts, is doing fine. In the flattened, reduced way of men who once occupied very large spaces and have had to learn to fit smaller ones. He has a new apartment. He has new relationships. He does not talk publicly about his first marriage. Claire took her daughter to Italy for her 16th birthday. They stood in a piazza in Florence on a warm evening, eating gelato, listening to a street musician play something slow and beautiful. Her daughter was laughing about something. Claire couldn't even remember what. She later, just laughing the way teenagers laugh, full and unself-conscious and alive. And Claire stood there in the Italian evening light and thought, this is what I was protecting. Not money, not the house, not the settlement or the firm or the vindication. This, the ability to stand in a piazza in Florence with her daughter, free, whole, unhurried. This was what had been worth protecting. She called her mother that night from the hotel. Her mother knew who had worked 2 jobs and told her every night that her worth was not up for debate. Her mother, who had built a daughter sturdy enough to survive what Claire had survived. She didn't say much on the call, just, "I'm okay, Mama. I'm really okay." And her mother, who had always been able to tell the difference, said, "I know, baby. I know." I want to say one more thing before we close, because I think it matters. There is a version of this story that gets told as a revenge story, and the scorned wife who hits back, the woman who wins, and there is satisfaction in that version. I'm not going to pretend there isn't. But that's not actually what happened here. Revenge implies that the goal was to hurt Ryan. Claire's goal was never to hurt him. Her goal was to protect herself, completely, legally, thoroughly. And then to build something that was entirely hers. What Ryan lost was not taken from him. He dismantled it himself, one decision at a time. He and Claire simply stopped standing in the way of the consequences. The word that Ryan used against her, dramatic, is worth thinking about. It is a word used almost exclusively to dismiss women. It means, your feelings are disproportionate. Your reaction is excessive. You are performing rather than experiencing. Claire was not dramatic. Claire was paying attention. There is a profound difference. She had been paying attention for years to the invoices, to the silences, to the ways she had been slowly, systematically excluded from her own life. And when the moment came, when she was at the bottom of a pool surrounded by people who refused to help her, she did not fall apart. She made a folder. I'll leave you with a question, and I genuinely want you to sit with it. If you had been in that pool, if the person you had built your life with had stood above you and laughed, and called you dramatic in front of 100 people, what would your first move have been? Think about it. Because I believe the answer you give says something important about how you see yourself, about what you believe you deserve, about whether you think the quiet, invisible work of protecting yourself is something you're allowed to do. Claire believed she was allowed. That belief changed everything. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. I read every one. Oh, and if this story stayed with you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something real, subscribe to Behind the Lie. Because next week, we will go somewhere even more difficult. A story about a man who vanished from his family's life completely, and the daughter who spent 20 years searching for the truth about why. I'll see you there.